Hello and welcome. In this session, I'm going to be talking about managing user and sign-in risk with Azure AD Conditional Access policies. I've made a series of videos on conditional access. Check out my conditional access playlist. There's a link in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe and keep learning. And click that bell to keep up to date. Come with me into the cloud. If you want to respond to sign-in risk and user risk, you'll need a P2 license, which will give you Azure AD Identity Protection. Now, Microsoft have their threat intelligence, and their threat intelligence works over the whole of their identity real estate. So looking at identity from Microsoft 365, from Live, from Xbox, and so on, gathering all these signals and sort of analyzing what makes a sign-in risk, what makes a user risk. And that information and intelligence is brought into your tenant to analyze sign-ins from your users and also risks for your users. Now, if we want to respond to that, what we're going to need is some form of policy engine. And there's a policy engine, well, there's actually two of them, built in to identity protection. One responds to sign-in risk, the other responds to user risk. And what it does is it allows you to control whether a user can access applications. And what you can do is you could block a user's access depending on the value of the risk. We could also remediate, and we remediate differently depending on whether we've got a sign-in risk. If there's a sign-in risk, we get the user to do MFA to remediate that risk. If it's a perceived user risk, we get them to do a password change for the user risk. Okay, now, as I say, these policy engines is built into identity protection. But the recommendation now is to, if you're already using the inside identity protection, is to migrate to conditional access. If you're creating new policies, do it in conditional access. Now, with conditional access, we can do exactly the same as we've seen on the previous slide. But we can also bring in other signals. So you may want a different policy depending on the location where the user is or the application they're going to. You have that richness from using conditional access policy. We've also got the ability to use session controls, and with session controls, we can force the user to re-authenticate before they're allowed to remediate. So there's an extra layer of protection. And of course, a major advantage of using conditional access is it gives you a one-stop shop for all of your access control. So you haven't got some access control and identity protection and other in conditional access. It's all in one location. And of course, we've got report only mode. So we can create a policy, have it in report only mode and evaluate it before we actually implement it and turn it on. Let's have a look at these policy engines. I'm starting off in the Microsoft Entra Admin Center. We're going to go to Active Directory and then Protect and Secure. And under there, we'll find Identity Protection. And if we look in here, there's our two policy engines, the user risk policy and the sign-in risk policy. If we look at the user risk policy first, we can assign it to users. And we can decide whether it's all users. And actually, if it's a user risk, yes, I would assign it to all users because any user that is at risk, we need to probably remediate. In terms of the user risk, again, we can choose whether it's high, medium and above, low and above, and these are the risk scores that Microsoft have applied. Normally what you do, the recommendation is, if the user risk is high, do a password reset. So we can come in here and rather than blocking, we can get the user to remediate using a password change. All right, not quite as sophisticated as when we look at conditional access, but we'll come back to that in a second. So there's our sign-in risk policy, again applying to users, the risk level. And then what you want to have with a sign-in risk is to do multi-factor to remediate that sign-in risk. Okay, let's go and look at conditional access. And I've got one that I created earlier. And this is for a user risk. And we're saying if the user's risk's high, and we're applying it to all users except we've excluded our break glass accounts. It has to be applied to all cloud apps, right? And that sort of makes sense. So, you know, if your user's at risk, let's remediate that user. We don't really care which app they're going to. We need to get them remediated. So the condition here is high for user risk, and the actual grant is change password, but as part of that change password, we need to do multi-factor authentication. But here we can choose a particular multi-factor authentication strength. And we could say that actually, you know what? If you're at risk, you need to use a phishing resistant multi-factor to remediate. So there's lots of scope and richness for configuring it exactly what you want. And then if we go down to session, we've got the sign-in frequency here I've set to every time. So before a user will be able to reset their password, they will have to sign in again. And that's the policy engines. But remember, we should be migrating away from the policy engines in identity protection and using conditional access policy to manage risk. Let's have a look at how the risk is evaluated. So start off with sign-in risk. And what Microsoft will do is look at every sign-in and then evaluate the risk associated with that sign-in. Now, some of the times the evaluation can be done in real time. For instance, if you're coming in from an anonymous IP address, that is probably flagged as medium risk. It may actually be flagged as high risk at times. But there's also offline analyses that go on. So are you sort of coming in from a different country? And have you been moving countries on a regular basis? That could flag a risk. Microsoft don't actually say how they calculate the risk. What you have to do is rely on their threat intelligence, their very clever algorithms that analyze all the signals they're getting. And those are continuously being tuned to give you the best possible information. So we have to accept that a sign-in could be classified as high risk, medium, low, or none. There may be no risk associated with that particular sign-in. And what we need to do is respond. And it could be that we respond by actually looking at reports, or it could be that we respond, as we're talking about, through conditional access policy. So those events get put into the risky sign-in report. So that's where we can see them. And in the report, you'll see them logged as high, medium, and low. Obviously, it doesn't log something that has no risk associated with it. The other thing that will happen is that that information will also be put into the sign-in's risk detections. So we may have a risky sign-in, and that risky sign-in has been actually identified through real-time information and also offline information. So that will be one entry in risky sign-ins. But if we look in the sign-in risk detection, we'll have a risk detection from real-time and we'll have a risk detection from offline. And I'll show you that very shortly. Now, Microsoft are constantly looking at users and identifying user risk. And it could be that a user has leaked their credentials. It could be that the user is sort of doing certain activities that match well-known attack patterns. or it could be that the user has actually reported suspicious activities. But how does a user get flagged at being at risk? Well, it's actually a combination of looking at sign-ins and also the other user risk detections that go on. And then, of course, what will happen is we will have a risky user, which could be high, medium, or low. Again, they could be coming from sign-in events. The risk could be coming in from user risk detection events like leak credentials. And what they do, if you want to see them broken down, is you look at the user risk detections. A lot of this analysis is done by identity protection, but you also have the ability of enhancing the analysis by adding Defender products. So here we're showing the threat and risk telemetry coming into Azure AD Identity Protection, and that is then classifying user and sign-in risk. But we could actually use Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps and bring signals in from that and use information from Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps to flag risk. Again, signals could be brought in from Microsoft Defender for Identity, and that's coming up from your on-premise Active Directory. So if a user is a hybrid user, they've been compromised on premises, then that can be fed up into the telemetry, and again, we can respond to that. So that will get a risk classification. Let's have a look at the actual risk reports. So we're back in the Entry portal, and we're going to go to Identity Protection. And under here, you can see the various reports that are available. So risky users, I actually looked at risky workloads in a different video, and then we've got risky sign-ins. So let's start off with risky sign-ins. This will take a few seconds to enumerate out, and I'm going to just cut the weight out of the video. Okay, so what we can see is we've got various risky sign-ins, and we've got one here for John Williams. Let's have a look at that in a bit more detail. That's the actual time of the sign-in, and I can click on Risk Info, and here we actually see that there are two different detections. One is in real time and one has been done offline. Let's start with looking at the real time. So who did that detection? It was Identity Protection has done that. So this is a real-time evaluation of the sign-in by Identity Protection. If we look at the country region, this is actually offline, and the analysis has been done by Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. So we've got that integrated in, feeding those extra bits of information into our risk evaluation. And if you click here, it will actually take you over to the portal. This is going over to Defender for Cloud Apps. Very soon it will be automatically redirected to Microsoft 365 Defender. But for now, we've just come over to Cloud Apps. I won't bother going over to the other Defender. And what it's doing is giving us more information. So it says the user John Williams performed activities from Austria, Germany, France, and 3 additional infrequent locations. And if I look down here, this guy is coming in, this John Williams is coming in from all sorts of anonymous IPs. Definitely looks a bit dodgy. So that's the additional information we can get from Defender. If we come back into the sign-in risk details, what we can do is we can actually say, yes, I confirm we're compromised. That's my analysis of the situation based on reading that additional information from Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. Or I could just say, hey, no, I'm quite happy. I confirm it's safe. Right. Another way of visualizing this, remember, this is a user sign-in risk made up of 2 components. If I look at the sign-in's risk detection, we'll see those 2 components in there. Okay. Let's have a look at our risky users. So we go to identity protection and go to the risky users, and we can see that we've got a number of risky users. If I have a look at Don, I can look at recently risky sign-ins for Don. So that's one thing I could take a look at. And if we look at that, oh, we've only got one, and it was a failure. And then we can look at detections not linked to a sign-in. And that gives us the details of something that was actually triggered by the user. So the user reported suspicious activity. And I'll show you how that's done shortly. And then if we look at users' risk detections, we can see that we've got something in terms of the user risk came from a sign-in and also from the user reporting suspicious activity. Again, what we can do is, if we look back here, we can do our remediation. Here it's a bit more comprehensive. Normally a user at risk, we'd reset their password. We could block the user, or we could go and do further investigation through Microsoft 365 Defender. We can get our users to remediate risk through conditional access policy settings. And these are the Microsoft recommendations. To remediate high-risk user, create a conditional access policy to require password change. Now, MFA will also be required, and the user must be registered for MFA in advance because the changes have to be made within the context of conditional access. If you've got a hybrid user, that's a user coming from on-premises AD into the cloud, then password write back must be enabled for those hybrid users. To remediate high or medium sign-in risk, you create a policy to require MFA. And the beauty of doing this remediation is the risks are automatically remediated, avoiding unnecessary noise for administrators. So the administrators will not even see these unless they are actually specifically looking for remediated risks. Let's have a little demo. I'm starting off on my client machine and I'm going to go to my test application OIDC v1. And I'm going to sign in as Don. Now, Don is a high-risk user, and yet he can successfully sign in. And of course, the reason he can successfully sign in is I've got no conditional access policy at the moment managing risk. So let's just close that off and let's go over to the portal. And what we're looking for in the portal is the conditional access policies. I've got one I actually created earlier. So we go to policies and we go down, all users, and this is going to be all users except for my break glass accounts. What we're doing, it's all cloud apps, and it has to be all cloud apps. And we're saying the condition, we're saying if the risk is high, what I want to happen is I want the password to be changed and also require multi-factor authentication. And I'm going to turn this on and save that. So now let's go back to the client and let's sign in once again as my user Don. So we're going as OpenID Connect again, and we're going in as Don using Don's password, and he's being prompted for multi-factor. So let's just do the multi-factor and approve that sign in. So 66. That's done. And now we're being asked to change our password. So we'll go in, we've actually got Don's old password and we'll give him a new password. I think I left off something on that one. Let's sign in with that. And we've updated Don's password, and we're just going to update that with the new password. So that's successful. So now, after about 5 minutes, we should find that Don has been remediated in terms of his risk. So we'll go back into the portal and we'll go down to identity protection again, and we'll look at risky users. And at the moment, Don is still there, but shortly he will disappear. And once again, I'm going to just stop the video until this has happened. And let's refresh again. And there he is. He's gone. Okay, so that's actually taken about three and a half minutes for Don to be removed from the list. Now, what I can do is I can look at the risk state and I can look at remediated. So apply that, and Don was remediated, and he's just been remediated at this point in time. So that's absolutely great. Let's go back to the client and see if we can log Don in again. So we're going to come in as Don to OIDC v1 and sign him in. And we should be able to go in just with our password because we've remediated that risk. So if I go to OIDC v1 using a Tor browser, I will actually end up coming from an anonymous IP address. So let's go off there. And I'm going to go in as my user Don again. And if I can remember what I reset his password to, that would help. So that's good. Okay, so we're in as Don, and that was successful. Now, that was actually would have been marked as a risky sign-in. And if we go back to the portal, after a few minutes, that will show in the portal as a risky sign-in. So let's go across to risky sign-ins and let those enumerate. And after a few refreshes, we'll see Don Ovo in our risky sign-in reports. So if we click on that and look at the risk information, we can see that it's actually identified as the sign-in has come from an anonymous IP address. It's a real-time detection. It's been detected by identity protection, and it has been flagged as high risk. Quite often, anonymous IP comes in as medium risk, but it's probably been flagged as high because of the sort of past behavior of this particular user. Okay, so how can we mitigate against this? Well, we need to go to our conditional access, and we go to our policies, and we come down to my policy that deals with managing sign-in risk. And here I've got all users included, and I've again excluded my break glass accounts. I'm applying it to all cloud apps. The condition in this case is sign-in risk. If it's high or medium, what I want to happen is I want MFA. And that is my policy. So I'm going to turn that on, save that, and then we'll go back to the client and we'll close off the Tor browser and go back in again. And we'll connect our Tor browser. Actually, before we do that, let's just go in directly to OIDC2, not through a Tor browser, and sign in with OpenID and sign in as Don. And that's successful. No MFA prompt. Okay. So we'll use the Tor browser to go across to our application. So we're using an anonymous IP, and we're going to go in with OpenID Connect as normal. We're going to sign in as Don. Again, I've got to remember his password. And we're being prompted for MFA. So let's respond to that MFA prompt, which is 93. Oh, and we're coming in from Utrecht in the Netherlands. So done with that. And we're signed in. And that has now remediated the sign-in risk. Okay, I want to show you that just again. So I'm going to close the Tor browser. I'm going to go in again because I want an MFA prompt. And so again, we'll establish the connection with the Tor browser. We'll go to the application. And what I want to do now is, again, sign in. And we're going to be signing in as our user once again. And we're being asked to approve. So what I want to do is actually show you the screen of my phone, and I want to go and make that, I'm going to approve that sign in. And this time I'm coming in from Germany because we come in with different connections from our Tor browser. And rather than actually putting the thing in, I'm going to go down and say, no, it's not me. And that was it. And there was no way of reporting suspicious activity. Let's just close the browser off again and just fire it up because I want to use it again in 1 second. And I'm going to connect, and I'm going to go back to the portal while that brews, and I'm going to go across to authentication methods and settings. And this is where we can enable the reporting of suspicious activity. And it's Microsoft managed, so at some point Microsoft will turn it on for everyone. At the moment it's in preview, and I'm going to enable it for my tenant. So I'm going to save that, and having saved that, we'll go back to the client and we'll use our Tor browser, which will prompt for MFA to remediate the risky sign-in. So I'm going to come in here with my user again. And once again, I'm being prompted for MFA. So let's just switch back to my phone. There's the approve the sign in. Oh, this time I'm coming from the United States. You travel around when you're using a Tor browser. And what I'm going to do is actually bring that down again, say, no, it's not me, but this time I can report the activity as suspicious because I'm getting, imagine you're on holiday and you're getting a MFA prompt and you go, hey, this is not me. And you report it. And once you've reported it, the user will be marked as high risk, which is what we saw at the beginning. Now you know how to manage user and sign-in risk with Azure AD Conditional Access policies. Don't forget to subscribe and keep learning, and please click that bell to receive notifications as my new videos become available. I'll see you next time in the cloud. Thanks for watching my channel. Subscribe for more free training. You might like to join me for my Identity Masterclass. Hopefully, see you soon.